Afternoon. I am Josefina Bonilla, and you are watching the Roar webinar series with my co-host, Dr. Lisa Coleman. Dr. Coleman, thanks for being here.
Hello, it's great to see you again.
Thank you, thank you. I feel like I'm all sweaty today,
Ah, is it warm there?
a little warm. I'm secretly in Fort Lauderdale. Not so secret.
Yeah, it looks like it's a nice day here. It was a little rainy this weekend, but good for
And
the flowers.
it's good for the flowers and for your hair.
Yes, that's true.
So Mondays, we spend all Mondays talking about diversity, inclusion, and equity. Last week, we talked about ERGs. And the more I think about it, the more I feel like there's a need to talk more about strategy.
Yep.
I think there may be the global strategy a company kind of puts together, and then maybe there's some strategies that you as an employee can direct some of the conversations that are had for D&I. Do you
Yeah,
think that's possible as an employee?
absolutely. And I think strategy is key, especially right now, right? And I know that a few people have reached out to me because they're thinking about what should their strategy be during COVID-19, right? How do we make sure that diversity, inclusion, and equity initiatives don't go by the wayside? I don't see how they could, given the disparate and differential impact. But I do understand that right now, so many people are, they're in the crisis, right, moment of thinking about returning to work or returning to school with their kids, or taking care of their families. So what might not be at the forefront of their mind are equity issues, right, unless it's personal.
Well,
Um,
but Lisa, some things like I was thinking about as you're going through possibly changing careers,
yeah.
possibly changing, and you're in this place where you're interviewing for jobs, right? And all of a sudden, before you can have a phone interview, but now with the I feel like there's not that opportunity for you to sell yourself a little bit more on the phone before they realize, oh my God, you're a person
Right.
of color. Are we ready for you? Which
That's
is,
right.
yeah. So what do you do with that?
Well, I mean, you've got to figure out, I think we talked a little bit about this last time, but institutional readiness or organizational readiness, and to figure out if the organization's ready for you. But I do think, so I'm going to answer this question in two parts. One is doing your homework around the organization that we talked about. Like, you have to do that. You have to study and figure out, are they ready? What kind of messages are they sending? If they don't have a lot of people of color that they've hired already, then what are their motives? Right? What if they said their motives are? Have they been in trouble? Have they been in the news? And then I think the other piece is, as you're going through, to your point, a lot of people, they used to do, right, they would make themselves stand out by going to networking opportunities or events. But now what people are doing are creating, in fact, I just got an ad to do this, right, was to create a professional Facebook page or professional Instagram page or something like that. So I do encourage employees or the candidate seekers, people seeking jobs, to create those professional online, what, you don't have to create a whole web page. I mean, that might be a lot, but to create your professional pages on the social media platforms that you have, um, because I think that's another way. And we know that now employers do Google people, right? So you want to have your professional page maybe more front and center than your personal page, because then your professional page will perhaps say some things about you that you want your company to know before they hire you. So if diversity, inclusion, and equity is important to you, then what you might have on your professional page is, diversity, inclusion, and equity is important to me in terms of how an employer is, thinking about those issues across the company. Then the employer will know that's something that's important to you, and you will be asking those questions. So in other words, it's a strategy to put that out there in the front, so that then when you're interviewing and you bring it up, it doesn't come as a surprise.
Right, right. Well, when you talk about readiness, right, I immediately think, well, sometimes we're not in a position to question readiness
Yeah.
because we're really looking at our pocketbooks. and we're making decisions based on our financial needs. And we enter a company that may have gotten their hand slapped a few times,
Yeah.
may be saying certain things, but they're not really ready. So you're going in, right, to a situation. But I think there's opportunities there as well. And I think
Absolutely.
so,
And there's absolutely and there's ability to help get them ready, right? All companies are going to be in differently. Readiness is like a continuum. So no company, I don't know any companies that are just like, all doing it all right all the time every day. I mean, if they are, call us. But like, right. So I think, right, everybody's on a journey. And so that journey is you're helping that company be more ready in any given moment along that journey. The question is how are they going to accept that feedback or etc. So I think you have to figure out what kind of feedback loops are work within an organization. And I'll give you just a concrete example. Within some organizations, confrontation is not a good idea, right? It's about collaboration or influence. In some organizations, they like it when people are confrontive and yell and are kind of out the box. So it depends on the organization. And I think you have to figure out not only what type of organization, but what kind of type of person you are. I interviewed for a higher education institution, and the president of the institution said to me during the interview, how will you deal with when people yell at you and maybe call you racial epithets? And I said, right. I said, well, I won't be taking this job. I knew that I did not have that personality, but I do know someone who took that job, right? And they were able to deal with things differently than I am. But I knew that those would be triggers for me. So you just have to think about that.
Yeah, plus you're in a different place financially.
Yes. And I can make those choices, right? And so you have to know when you're interviewing for a job also what choices you can make and what choices you can't make. So the other thing is sometimes I've taken a job and I've known that I might not be at that job forever, especially when I was younger, right? So I might take that job because strategically I needed money in my pocket and I needed the experience, but I'm also knowing going into that job that my strategy is to learn as much as possible and to get out as quickly as possible. Exactly. So, right. So you also have the different ways to go into different jobs. Every job is not your career job. It may help you with your career, but it's not necessarily your career job.
That's a really good point, because if what you want to do is, one, get a job because you need to, two, get into the D&I space, maybe you take a job that doesn't show up in the way that you'd like it to, and you set the strategy to stay on, learn as much as you can, take whatever courses, go to what, I think one time you and I were talking when I first took on the role of Chief Diversity Officer for a Bridge Tower. You suggested, it was a new job for me, although I had been in the periphery of diversity and inclusion, I wasn't smack in doing the work. And so you recommended I attend certain conferences. Do you remember that?
That's right. So you use the opportunity to build your skills, both internally and then build your networks, right? Because that's the opportunity that the job itself, I mean, I always say this about jobs. It's not what you can do for them, it's what they can do for you. Right. So what are you going to leave that job, or even if you're not leaving the company, what are you going to leave the role? What are you leaving with? So what are you building toward and for? And so I think that's the question I always ask myself, right? What are they doing for me?
What can they do for you? What opportunities can I get for training and development?
How can I strategically leverage this opportunity for now and for the future?
The network. What network can I create? Because I remember going and speaking to a number of chief diversity officers and saying, talk to me about how you created the strategy for your company. What are the low-hanging fruits?
Exactly.
Because that was some small wins that I could get initially.
And we don't have to recreate the wheel, right? Like everybody, you can make a great impact on a company or an organization and have individual impact and meaningful impact. But that doesn't mean you have to recreate the wheel. You can learn from others, take those learnings and create your niche within your company or organization. But it doesn't mean, I mean, doing a climate assessment, we've all done that. We can help you if you've never done it, but then how you apply it, etc., will be specific, and there will be specific learnings from your specific company. But a climate assessment is a climate assessment.
Right, right. And there's people, to your point, that have already done it, have done it a number of times. And I think part of going into, or part of the strategy that you should implement, is knowing what the vernacular is for the position.
That's right. Oh, that's for sure.
Some things you know it as X, but really in that space, you saying those particular words give you a lot more credibility.
I say this all the time. The lingo matters. Lingo matters. I'm an educational person. I'm in education. So in higher education, we have a lot of big words. The heterogeneous construction of the whatever, right? The more you can throw those words around, right, the better. But if I were in HR, I'd be using words around benefit. I'd be using words I don't even know. So you have to know your field and your area and what that lingo is. And if you want to move, right? So you want to move from one area to another. Let's say I'm in let's say I'm in finance, I want to move to HR or vice versa. You've got to learn the lingo, not just in your company, but of that particular division or field. Because finance lingo and HR lingo, those are two different lingos.
As a matter of fact, I'm going to digress a little bit. I had an interview with a company. It was the worst interview I ever had. And this is between the time that I was with Color, thinking of selling Color, starting Right Media. And I had this interview, and it was for a CMO role. So, I've done CMO, I've done CDO. And they asked me a question about persona. And I'm thinking in my head, what could they be talking about? Because I didn't prepare myself for the lingo, because I had been in the space and I had used my own lingo, or I had been driving the department. So I didn't learn that, which was a missed opportunity.
Yes,
and
right.
So when I'm looking at him and thinking, what could he possibly? Super important, no matter what job you're going for.
No, that's exactly right. And so, right, I'm sure you can fake it till you make it, but it's better not to have to fake it, right?
And can use words to talk about your experience and kind of wrap those words around whatever that experience is.
No, that's absolutely right. And I think that, right, and people then will ask, well, how can I learn the lingo? Pick up a journal, read, right? Read from practitioners. Look at those talks on YouTube where you look at some, and even if it's boring, look at it, because that's where you're going to learn those things. You can't just imagine it through osmosis. You actually have to read it. You have to see people use it, right? And the worst, and we all know this, and I'll just say it now, don't misuse the words, right? You've got to learn how they're pronounced and those kind of things, because that's a dead giveaway. It's a dead giveaway that you're new to the field, right?
Person, eh?
Exactly. Exactly.
So in diversity, inclusion, and equity, Harvard Business Review has tons of studies that you pull open, get the information, and really you can base some of the conversations you have based on those studies.
Absolutely. Deloitte, PwC. I mean, so many companies have their own areas. In higher education, the AAUP, Association of University Professors, and the College and University, it doesn't matter what field you're in, the Association of American Medical Colleges, everyone, go. All you have to do, go to their websites, type in diversity and inclusion, look at their toolkits, type in toolkits for your field, financial, diversity management, asset management. All of the areas have toolkits, and that, like I said, you don't have to recreate the wheel, and you can learn a lot just by reading.
Yeah,
It's practice.
and that could be part of, we started off the conversation talking about strategy. We're talking about your own personal strategy. And then once you have those toolkits, because you're creating those for yourself.
That's right.
It sounds so much more as a practitioner as opposed to an imagined one.
No, that's exactly right. And I think that the key is, right, to go back to this question of strategy. You need to know the organizational strategy, but you have to have a personal strategy. I said this as part of another webinar, and the difference between people who are successful and people who aren't successful. People who are successful are those people who made mistakes, brushed themselves off, and got up. The people who are unsuccessful are the people who didn't learn from their mistakes. They just sat down and said, oh, that's a mistake, and I'm never going to do that again. And so to think about personal strategy is to think about how you're going to learn from your mistakes. How are you going to brush yourself off? How are you going to build from your toolkit, utilize the skills that you develop over time, and then strategically apply them over and over again so you become, right, more curated and more polished over time.
Exactly. That you're absolutely right. Curated and polished.
That's exactly right.
That means a bigger title, more money.
I, as a younger diversity officer, I say this all the time. I started in this field when it wasn't even a field, right? So I didn't know what I was doing. I asked for nothing and got nothing. And then little by little, I asked for more, not just in terms of salary, but perks, in terms of portfolio, in terms of everything. And strategically, I learned from the mistakes where I didn't ask for certain things. I was able to reimagine, reapply, develop new tools, new skills, and then develop throughout the field. And so when people say now, oh, you're a leader in the field, yeah, but that took years of curation and practice and strategic development and picking myself up after my mistakes and learning from them.
I totally agree with that because, I've done it a time or two.
I do know that.
Well, you're a new person going into a CDO role, because I believe we have a few currently, both in the Zoom meeting as well as on Facebook. These are folks that are new to the CDO space. They've been in the company, but not, and they've been in the periphery doing diversity and inclusion work, but
Yes.
they have the experience as a CDO. What do you recommend the first things? I know we talked about the lingo, we talked about going into the journals, getting information. What's the next best? Maybe they have a small win they need to.
Yeah, they need a small win. And so what I always say is, so learn the lingo, do all of those things. But if you're already in your company, and let's say you've taken on some of the diversity and inclusion educational components, or the ERG, or whatever it is, figure out what a small win is. So let's say the small win is this. You take over the ERG, and then the ERG informs a new hiring practice, right? Maybe maybe you have to have, now instead of having one person interview, you're going to have committee interviews, 2 people, to cut down on bias, whatever it is. Develop a small win early on that shows the importance of the work and the group. So if you're heading a group, why it's important to have that group sustained, what the value is to the company and the mission. So that's why I use that example of like an ERG that helps with recruitment. Maybe it's your ERG that's focused on Latinx populations. So it's connected to some of the Latinx and Hispanic educational organizations for pipelines in terms of internships and new recruits, right? So thinking about, okay, if that ERG is connected to that, then we can leverage that ERG to think about recruiting into our company for internship programs, particularly if we don't have a lot of people who have Latinx diasporic backgrounds, right? So that's the kind of thing where figure out where the small win is, where you can demonstrate, right, growth opportunities for your company.
Plus, if you couple that, you have the small win, right? And you've created a small win, you've done all the work. Make sure you let everybody know.
Well, of course, you have to communicate it.
Exactly. So there, one of the CDOs that I initially talked to early on when I started in the role, one of the things that she recommended early on was create a newsletter.
I was just about to say a newsletter.
Yes.
A newsletter. I have a newsletter. It's one of the first things I created in every role that I have. You have to have a newsletter, and it can be one page. It doesn't have to be a long newsletter. It can be just highlights, but you need a newsletter, you need a communication tool, and you need it to be consistent and regular. So if you're going to do it once a month, do it once a month. You can do it twice, whatever it is, but to announce. Huh?
Don't say, I'm going to do, this is going to be going out every Monday, don't do that. Just send the newsletter on a scheduled date. And
don't overpromise, underpromise, and overdeliver.
Exactly. So send it out, see what your open rate is, see who's connected to it, and see what links they're really going into it and looking.
Exactly. Because I'll give you one example just from recently. So we developed an anti-racism link on our website. We got 18,000 hits consecutively for 3 weeks. That told me something about where my community was, particularly right as COVID-19 hit, with the xenophobia being directed toward people of Asian descent and then people of African descent, right? So then I was able to curate then new programs and new initiatives that were directly related to what my constituents were interested in. So, right, so I used those hits to say, okay, now if the hits had been on something else, I would have used that to direct my programming and my engagement. So that's exactly right, Josefina. Utilize, people talk about data analytics, but they don't actually know what that means. You use the data and the analytics to actually then inform the work that you're going to do moving forward.
Exactly. So what do you include in your newsletters?
So I always include highlights that I'm doing. So you want highlights of your organization or group or individual. So if it's individual highlight, or if it's an ERG, right? So maybe it's highlighting me as the leader of the ERG, and these are the things that we're doing. So that's 1. 2, you need to highlight collaborations. You can't seem like you're working in isolation.
And it can't be a Lisa Coleman show.
No, you have to show collaboration. So that's why I said, if you're representing the group, then you can do highlights. But it's not Lisa Coleman spoke at X, Y, and Z. It's how the group is helping the company. So we partnered with the United Negro College Fund. We partnered with the Ascend organization, right? And these were the outcomes. That's in the newsletter. And then like I said, you have to note those partnerships, both internal and external, and celebrate them. And then the last thing you always do, is you recognize somebody else.
Love it. You're absolutely right.
Or some other group. And you talk about how wonderful they are, whether they're part of the diversity category or not. So it could be that you're celebrating the great thing that your LGBTQ plus group did, or your disability group. But it could be that you're celebrating what your finance group did, because they did a great diversity award this year. And so now you're celebrating the finance department. You always celebrate somebody else, and you use it as a connection.
So you do, again, just to go back,
you celebrate the wins that you have individually as part of your organization, so whether that's an ERG or something like that, you identify the partnerships, right, that you are engaging with internally and externally to show, right, growth. And then lastly, you celebrate somebody else.
I love it. I love it. And this email blast, doesn't have to be, super condensed with information. I tell people,
it's highlights.
Please condense. You don't have to have 2 paragraphs. No. You don't have to constantly. Less is more with email.
Less is more. And think about it this way. It's like a newspaper or a magazine, right? You're teasing people. You want them to be more interested. So you give them just enough to come to the program. You give them just enough to be more interested, to come to your website, to maybe reach out to you, to ask you more questions. Because what you want them to actually do is to be more involved.
So if you have a team of 1,
yeah,
right, in your department, you are the team at this point. This is time-consuming work.
Yes.
But so important. I would put it on there as the number 2 thing that you do.
Absolutely. And you need to routinize it. To your earlier point, right? If I know I have a newsletter, these are the 3 things that I'm going to do, or 4 things I'm going to do in that newsletter every time. Then between newsletters, I should be, right, compiling information so that the newsletter is getting populated, right, by the things I'm doing, as opposed to me having to go back retroactively and add things in. So instead, what I will do, but particularly when I was a 1-person or small shop, I would just catalog everything I did every day. And then, right, and then at the end of the week, I would put it into different categories. So, because every day I didn't have time to categorize, but I did have time to say, okay, these are the 7 things I did today. Write down, take notes, and then at the end of the week, recategorize them. That recategorization, some things went into the newsletter, some things went into my strategic plan, some things went into my programmatic initiatives, right? But then I would know, on Monday, I discussed these 5 things. 3 of them go here, 2 of them go here, 1 goes here.
I love it. I love it. Well, we are almost out of time.
Goes fast.
No, it does. It always does. I think next week we should have a follow-up conversation about data analytics and how to use them.
Absolutely. That's one of my favorite topics. I love data.
Me too. So I think that would be the topic if you're in agreement. So folks that are watching us now will know that next Monday at 1 p.m. Again, we set up a schedule, we set up the time, and we're setting up what the content is.
Thanks so much. So great to see you. Great to see everyone. I hope everyone has a great week.
Thank you. And next Monday, also register for our virtual conference. Dr. Coleman is going to moderate, and we are accepting proposals. So send them to me at Josefina.
What's the date on that conference, Josefina?
It's the Roar Virtual Conference 2.0.
2.0, September?
It is actually October 14th.
Oh, October 14th. Look, see, I didn't even remember. October 14th.
No, I lied to you. Did I lie? It is October 14th. It is.
It's October 14th. Okay.
I'll confirm it. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next Monday.
See you next Monday.